The message arrived at the throne world of the Velthari Empire on what the humans would later call a beautiful irony. Emperor Kael'thorus IX sat upon his crystalline throne, his 4 eyes scanning the holographic display that materialized before him with growing unease. The sender was marked as Priority Absolute, a classification reserved for existential threats to the Empire's 12,000-year reign. "Your eternal magnificence," the message began, transmitted from the Krillian Confederacy, a neutral power that had observed galactic affairs for millennia without interference. "We break our sacred silence to deliver this warning. The species known as humans from the Sol system are not what they appear. Their weakness is a facade. Their primitiveness is theater. By the time you read this, it may already be too late. They are coming for you. They have been coming for you since the moment you first made contact. Every interaction, every treaty, every seeming defeat, all of it was calculated. We have seen the patterns. We have decoded their strategy. The trap is already sprung. May whatever gods you worship have mercy on your civilization." Emperor Kael'thorus let out a sound that, in his species, passed for laughter. His advisors exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether their sovereign found the message amusing or had finally succumbed to the madness that claimed so many of his predecessors. "The humans?" he finally said, his voice dripping with contempt. "The same humans who surrendered 3 colony worlds to us without a single shot fired? The same humans who pay tribute in raw materials every cycle? The same humans whose ambassador weeps and begs at every diplomatic summit?" He waved a clawed hand dismissively. "The Krillians have finally lost their vaunted objectivity. Archive this with the other delusions." His chief intelligence officer, a weathered veteran named Sorith, stepped forward hesitantly. "Your Magnificence, perhaps we should at least review." "Enough." The Emperor's tone brooked no argument. "I have more pressing matters than entertaining fantasies about those pathetic mammals. They are useful as a buffer state against the periphery raiders, nothing more. Dismissed." 300 light-years away, in a bunker buried deep beneath the frozen surface of Europa, Fleet Admiral Helena Chen smiled as she reviewed the intercepted transmission. The Krillians had done exactly what the human intelligence services predicted they would do: issue a warning so dramatic, so seemingly paranoid, that no self-respecting imperial ruler would take it seriously. "Confirmation from Signet," her aide reported. "The Emperor dismissed the warning within 4 minutes of receipt. Didn't even forward it to military intelligence." "Good." Admiral Chen turned to face the massive strategic display that dominated the command center. Thousands of tiny lights represented human assets spread across 300 star systems. Assets the Velthari had no idea existed. "Begin Phase 7. The aide hesitated. "Admiral, Phase 7 is... Once we commit, there's no going back. The entire masquerade ends." "The masquerade," Chen replied softly, "was always meant to end. The question was never if, but when. And the answer to that question was determined 47 years ago, when the Velthari first arrived in our system and demanded our submission." She paused, her eyes distant. "They killed 11 million people on Mars to make their point. 11 million in the span of a single day. They thought they were teaching us the price of resistance. They were right, but not in the way they imagined. They taught us that the universe was cruel, that mercy was weakness, and that the only path to survival was to become something they could never imagine us becoming." She straightened, her resolve hardening. 47 years of humiliation. 47 years of bowing and scraping and paying tribute. 47 years of watching our people pretend to be broken while we built something terrible in the shadows. That's long enough. Send the signal. The true history of humanity's first contact with the Velfari Empire was not the story told in official records. The official version spoke of a primitive species, barely capable of interstellar travel, that had the good fortune to encounter the benevolent empire and accept its protection. The truth was considerably darker. When the Velfari survey vessel first detected human radio signals in 2157, they followed standard imperial protocol for encountering pre-FTL civilizations: observation, assessment, and, if the species showed any potential for future threat, preemptive subjugation. Humanity, with its violent history and rapid technological advancement, was flagged as a potential threat within the first month of observation. The Velfari arrived in force in 2159, a full battle fleet of 300 vessels, enough firepower to crack a planet's crust. They broadcast their demands in every human language simultaneously: immediate surrender, disarmament, and acceptance of imperial governance. Any resistance would be met with the complete annihilation of Earth. Humanity's leaders faced an impossible choice. Their most advanced weapons were chemical rockets and nuclear warheads, pathetic toys against ships that could accelerate to a fraction of light speed and project energy shields that laughed at atomic fire. Some advocated fighting anyway, preferring extinction to slavery. Others counseled surrender, hoping that compliance might buy time for eventual liberation. In the end, a third option emerged, one proposed by a quiet coalition of strategists, psychologists, and historians who had been studying the Velfari from the moment of first contact. They called themselves the Long Game Committee, and their proposal was audacious in its simplicity. Humanity would surrender, but the surrender itself would be a weapon. "We cannot match their technology," the committee's leader, Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, argued in that fateful meeting. "Not today, not in a decade, perhaps not in a century. But we can match and exceed their capacity for strategic patience. Every empire in human history has fallen, not to superior force, but to internal decay accelerated by external pressure applied at precisely the right moments. We will become that pressure. We will make ourselves so useful, so harmless, so pitiful, that they will never see us as a threat. And while they ignore us, we will learn everything about them: their technology, their politics, their psychology, their weaknesses. And when the time is right, when we have become what we need to become, we will remind them why our ancestors conquered a planet." The vote was unanimous. Humanity chose to play dead. The first decade of the masquerade, as it came to be known internally, was the hardest. The Velfari imposed their rule with brutal efficiency. Human military forces were disbanded. Heavy industry was restricted. Space travel was limited to a handful of approved routes. Most painfully, they demanded tribute: 20% of Earth's industrial output, shipped to imperial coffers every year. But even as they submitted, humanity prepared. The Long Game Committee evolved into an organization known simply as the Foundation, a shadow government that operated parallel to the puppet administration the Velfari had installed. The Foundation's mandate was simple: preserve human knowledge, develop human capability, and prepare for the day of reckoning. They hid laboratories in asteroid mines that Imperial inspectors never bothered to visit. They conducted research in deep ocean facilities that Velfari sensors couldn't penetrate. They recruited the brightest minds of every generation and gave them a single task: reverse engineer every piece of alien technology they could acquire, then improve upon it. The tribute itself became a weapon.
Every shipment that left Earth contained hidden sensors, microscopic recording devices that mapped imperial logistics and military movements. The raw materials humanity provided were subtly processed in ways that made them ideal for human technology, but slightly suboptimal for Velthari systems. Not enough to notice, but enough to matter over decades.
And everywhere, human agents spread throughout the Empire, wearing the mask of servile workers and compliant administrators. They learned Velthari languages, studied Velthari culture, and mapped the intricate web of rivalries and resentments that defined imperial politics. They identified dissident factions, oppressed species, and ambitious nobles who might prove useful when the time came.
By the 20th year of occupation, the Foundation's intelligence network was the most sophisticated in the galaxy. By the 30th year, human technology had secretly surpassed Velthari capabilities in 17 critical areas. By the 40th year, humanity had more warships hidden in deep space than the entire Imperial Navy. Ships built in secret shipyards, crewed by generations who had never known freedom but had been raised to fight for it.
And through it all, humanity played its role perfectly. The sniveling ambassadors, the cowering diplomats, the grateful tributaries who thanked their masters for the privilege of servitude. It was a performance worthy of the greatest actors in human history, sustained across generations by a hatred so pure and patient that it had become almost religious.
High Admiral Vexaran of the Imperial Third Fleet was enjoying a routine patrol through the outer reaches when his tactical officer's voice cuts through his comfortable boredom.
"Admiral, we're detecting unusual readings from the Terminus sector."
Vexaran stretched his forearms lazily. Define unusual.
"Energy signatures, sir. Hundreds of them. They appeared simultaneously across a region spanning 3 light-years. They don't match any known Imperial or Allied drive signatures." That got the Admiral's attention. He pulled up the tactical display, his eyes widening as he took in the scope of what his sensors were detecting. That's not possible. There's nothing in that sector but dead systems and the human buffer worlds.
"Sir, the signatures are resolving now. They appear to be ships, warships, over 800 of them, and more appearing every minute."
"What species?" There was a pause. "Unknown, sir. The hull configurations don't match anything in our database. But what? They're broadcasting, Admiral. A single message, repeating on all frequencies." The tactical officer's voice had taken on a strange quality. "It's in Imperial Standard. It says, 'Remember Mars.'" Vexaran felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of military service. Fear. "Get me a direct line to High Command, now, and bring the fleet to combat alert." But even as his orders were being carried out, the first human missiles were already in flight. Weapons that moved faster than anything the Velthari had ever encountered. Guided by AI systems that made Imperial targeting look like children throwing rocks. The Third Fleet had 17 seconds to live, and they spent most of those seconds in confusion. The last thing Admiral Vexaran saw before his flagship disintegrated was a human vessel decloaking off his bow. A ship that shouldn't exist, wielding weapons that couldn't exist, crewed by a species that should have been broken. The humans, it seemed, had other ideas. The news of the Third Fleet's destruction reached the throne world in fragments, each report more alarming than the last. Emperor Kael'Thorus watched the tactical updates with growing horror, the Krillian warning now burning in his memory like a brand. "How is this possible?" he demanded. "Our intelligence indicated humans had no significant military capability. They could barely maintain their interplanetary trade routes." His intelligence chief, Soreth, stood before him,
his posture that of a being who knew he was already dead. "Your Magnificence, it appears, our intelligence was flawed, comprehensively and deliberately flawed. The humans fed us exactly what we wanted to see, and we never questioned it because it confirmed our assumptions."
Assumptions? What assumptions?
That they were what they appeared to be. Magnificence. Weak, broken, grateful. We saw what we expected to see because we never imagined they could be anything else. And while we weren't looking, Soreth's voice cracked, while we weren't looking, they built an armada. They developed weapons our scientists don't even have theories for. They infiltrated every level of our government, our military, our economy. The humans we dismissed as servants and clerks, they were agents, Your Magnificence.
All of them. For 47 years, we were living in a trap, and we never knew it.
The Emperor's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of extreme distress in his species. Then we fight. We have the greatest military in the galaxy. We have subjugated 1,000 species. We will crush this rebellion as we have crushed all others.
Magnificence. Soreth hesitated. It may be too late for that. Explain.
Our fleet positioning, our supply lines, our communication relays, all of it was compromised years ago. The humans haven't just been preparing to fight us, they've been preparing the battlefield. Our forces are scattered across the Empire, positioned for internal control rather than external defense. It would take months to concentrate sufficient force to challenge the human fleet, and they know exactly where all our ships are. They can engage our forces piecemeal, defeating them in detail before we can mount a coordinated response. Then send out the call. Summon all forces to defend the core worlds. I've tried, Magnificence. Our communication networks, they're failing. Selectively. Messages reach some stations but not others. Fleets receive orders that contradict each other. It's chaos, and it's clearly deliberate. The humans have been inside our networks for years, and they've chosen now to show us exactly how deep their access goes. Emperor Kyle Thoros slumped back on his throne, the weight of understanding finally settling upon him. For the first time in 12,000 years, the Velthari Empire faced an enemy it could not simply overwhelm with superior numbers and technology. They faced an enemy that had studied them, learned them, and spent half a century preparing to destroy them. "What do they want?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "They've made no demands, Magnificence. No terms have been offered. They simply attack. Every Imperial installation they encounter is destroyed. Every Velthari ship is eliminated. They're not fighting for territory or resources or political concessions. Based on their pattern of operations," Soreth paused, as if the words themselves pained him. "Based on their pattern, they appear to be fighting for our extinction." In her command center on Europa, Admiral Chen reviewed the first day's results with grim satisfaction. 18 Imperial fleets engaged and destroyed. 47 major military installations eliminated. Communications across the Empire disrupted in patterns that would take Velthari analysts months to understand. And all of it achieved with minimal human casualties. The benefit of 47 years of preparation and an enemy who had never thought to prepare at all. "The Emperor has requested a direct communication," her aide reported. "He wishes to discuss terms." Of course he does. Chen didn't look up from her displays. Now that he realizes he's losing, he wants to negotiate, to bargain, to offer us some portion of what we could simply take. She finally turned to face her aide. Tell him no.
Admiral?
No communication. No negotiation. No terms. They had 47 years to treat with us as equals, and they chose to treat us as slaves. They had 47 years to show mercy, and they chose to show contempt. Now they will learn what humanity does to those who mistake our patience for weakness.
With respect, Admiral, some in the Foundation Council believe we should at least hear their offer. The war could be shortened significantly if...
The war will end when the Velthari Empire no longer exists. Chen's voice was flat, final. That was decided 47 years ago, when they murdered 11 million people to demonstrate their power. Every day since then has been dedicated to this moment. We didn't build this fleet, sacrifice these generations, play this endless, degrading game just to accept some negotiated settlement that leaves them capable of threatening us again. The Velthari wanted to rule humanity forever.
Instead, they will serve as a lesson to every other species in the galaxy. Humanity remembers. Humanity waits. And humanity repays.
Her aide swallowed hard. I'll inform the Emperor's representatives. Don't bother. By this time tomorrow, it won't matter what they know or don't know. Phase 8 begins in 6 hours. Phase 8 was the part of the plan that made even the Foundation's most hardened strategists uncomfortable. It was one thing to defeat an enemy's military. It was another to systematically dismantle their civilization. The Velthari Empire depended on a complex web of economic relationships, resource flows, and administrative systems that had evolved over millennia. Human analysts had spent decades mapping this web, identifying its critical nodes, and planning how to unravel it with surgical precision. On the morning of Phase 8, simultaneous operations struck at 17 industrial worlds that produced the rare elements necessary for Velthari faster-than-light drives. The facilities weren't destroyed. That would have been wasteful. Instead, human agents who had been embedded in these operations for years simply shut them down, corrupting the manufacturing processes in ways that would take months to identify and years to repair. At the same time, human ships began systematic interdiction of the trade routes that kept the Empire fed. Velthari agricultural worlds produced food for 100 subject species, but those worlds depended on imported fertilizers, machinery, and genetic stock. Without those imports, crop yields would collapse within a single growing season. Financial markets, already jittery from the military news, experienced cascade failures as human-designed algorithms triggered selling panics across the imperial economy. Currencies that had been stable for centuries became worthless overnight. Banks that had financed empires found themselves unable to process basic transactions. And through it all, human broadcasts flooded every communication frequency in the Empire. Not propaganda, but simple information. The truth about human capabilities. The truth about how long humanity had been preparing. The truth about how thoroughly the Empire had been infiltrated and compromised. The message was clear. The Velthari had been defeated before the first shot was fired. Everything since was simply the inevitable consequences playing out. The psychological impact was devastating. Velthari citizens, raised to believe in the Empire's invincibility, watched their world crumble around them. Military officers who had spent careers preparing for conventional wars found themselves fighting an enemy that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere. Administrators who had governed with absolute authority discovered that their authority meant nothing when the systems that enforced it no longer functioned. Within a week, the Velthari Empire, 12,000 years of history, 1,000 subject species, control of 1/4 of the galaxy, was in freefall. The Krillians watched the Empire's collapse with a mixture of vindication and horror. They had warned the Velthari. They had tried to explain what they had seen in the patterns of human behavior. But even they hadn't fully understood the scale of what humanity had prepared. They didn't just plan to defeat the Empire, the Krillian Observer Prime noted in his report to the Confederacy Council. They planned to erase it. Every strategic decision they've made, every target they've selected, every system they've disrupted, it's all designed to ensure the Empire can never reconstitute. They're not conquering the Velthari, they're removing them from the galactic equation entirely.
Can nothing be done to stop them? Another counselor asked.
By whom? The humans have been careful to avoid any action that might unite the galaxy against them. They haven't touched neutral powers. They've even reached out to species formerly subjugated by the Empire, offering them independence and trade relationships. The Velthari are alone, and they made themselves alone through 12,000 years of arrogance and cruelty. The humans are simply collecting the debt. What happens after? When the Empire falls, what will the humans do? The Observer Prime was silent for a long moment. That, he finally said, is the question that should concern us all. We know what humans can do when they are threatened. We know the patience they can display, the hatred they can sustain, the violence they can unleash. What we don't know is what they become when they are no longer threatened. Will they be content with their revenge? Or will they look at the galaxy and see nothing but potential enemies who must be dealt with before they become threats?
You think they might turn on us?
I think, the Observer Prime replied carefully, that we would be foolish to make the same mistake the Velthari did. We must never give humanity a reason to view us as a threat. We must never give them cause to believe that their safety requires our elimination. Because if there is one thing this war has demonstrated, it is that humans are capable of anything when they believe their survival is at stake. The Battle of Velcora, the Empire's capital system, lasted 3 days. It was the largest military engagement in galactic history, with over 4,000 ships on each side. The Velthari had concentrated everything they had left for a final defense of their homeworld, a desperate gamble to inflict enough casualties that the humans might be willing to negotiate. They failed. Human tactics were relentless and efficient. They used their superior intelligence to predict Velthari movements, their superior weapons to outrange Velthari defenses, and their superior coordination to execute maneuvers that Velthari commanders couldn't counter. Every time the Imperial forces thought they had found an advantage, human ships were already repositioning to nullify it. Every defensive formation was flanked. Every counterattack was anticipated and destroyed. By the end of the second day, the Imperial Navy had ceased to exist as a coherent fighting force. By the end of the third day, human ships held orbital supremacy over Velcora Prime. Emperor Kael'Tharas made one final attempt at communication. His message was broadcast in the clear, addressed directly to Admiral Chen. Humans, I address you not as an emperor, but as a representative of my species. What you have achieved is unprecedented. You have demonstrated capabilities we never imagined, patience we could not comprehend, and determination we grossly underestimated. You have won. The Empire will surrender unconditionally. We ask only that you spare our civilian population, our children, our future. We accept whatever terms you demand. We will pay any price you name, but please, show the mercy we did not show you. The response came not from Admiral Chen, but from Earth itself, a pre-recorded message that had been waiting for this moment for decades. The speaker was Dr. Sarah Okonkwo, long dead, but her words carried across the light years as if she were speaking from beyond the grave.
To the Velthari Empire, 47 years ago, you came to our world and demanded our surrender. You told us that resistance was futile, that your power was absolute, that our only choice was submission or extinction. We chose a third option. We chose to remember. We remembered the 11 million who died on Mars. We remembered every humiliation, every tribute payment, every sneer from every imperial official who saw us as nothing more than useful animals. We remembered, and we taught our children to remember, and they taught their children. Across generations, we passed down the memory like a sacred flame. You asked about mercy. You want to know if we will show you the compassion you denied us. The answer is, we will show you exactly as much mercy as you showed us. Not a gram more, not a gram less. You murdered 11 million. We will not murder your civilians in return. We are not you. But your empire, your military, your ruling class, your capacity to ever threaten another species again, these things will be destroyed. Completely, permanently. You will live because we choose to let you live, but you will never again have the power to do to another species what you did to us. Humanity remembers. Humanity waits. Humanity repays. Remember that when you wonder how this happened. Remember it and tell your children, so that no species ever again makes the mistake of believing us weak. The occupation of Velcora Prime was methodical and thorough. Human forces secured the planet's industrial centers, communication networks, and administrative hubs. The imperial government was dissolved. The military was disbanded. The aristocracy that had ruled for 12,000 years found itself stripped of all power and privilege. But there were no mass executions, no slave camps, no deliberate atrocities against civilians. The humans who had spent 47 years preparing for this moment had also spent those years debating what kind of victors they wanted to be. They had chosen to be the thing the Velthari had never been, just. Velthari citizens were given full rights under human law. War criminals were tried and punished, but ordinary soldiers and civilians were allowed to rebuild their lives. The subject species of the former empire were offered independence or voluntary association with the new human-led order. Most chose association, reasoning that humans who had fought so hard for their own freedom would respect the freedom of others. Admiral Chen walked through the corridors of the imperial palace, now quiet and emptied of its former grandeur. She stopped before a window overlooking the capital city, watching as human shuttles landed in orderly patterns, bringing administrators and relief workers rather than conquerors and occupiers. "It's strange," she said to no one in particular. "I spent my entire life preparing for this day. My parents prepared for it, my grandparents prepared for it, and now that it's here—" She trailed off. Her aide approached carefully. "Admiral? I thought I would feel something. Triumph, satisfaction, closure." She shook her head. "Instead, I just feel tired. Tired and old and wondering what we do now that the thing we were built to do is done." "We build something better, Admiral. That's what the Foundation always said. The war was just the first step. The real work, creating a galaxy where no species has to go through what we went through, that's what comes next." Chen nodded slowly. "You're right. Of course you're right. It's just—" She turned away from the window. "I've been a weapon my whole life. My parents raised me to be a weapon.
The Foundation shaped me into a weapon, and weapons aren't very good at building things.
Then perhaps it's time to become something else, Admiral.
Perhaps it is. She straightened, some of the weariness leaving her posture. Send a message to the Foundation Council. Tell them Admiral Chen recommends immediate transition to Phase 10, Reconstruction. The war is over. Let's see if we can win the peace. The integration of the former Velthari Empire into the new human-led order took decades. It was a process fraught with challenges, setbacks, and occasional violence. There were Velthari who couldn't accept the reversal of their fortunes, who launched futile resistance movements that had to be suppressed. There were human factions who argued for harsher treatment of their former oppressors, who had to be reminded that becoming what they fought against would be the worst kind of defeat. But gradually, painfully, a new order emerged. Human technology spread throughout the galaxy, raising living standards for billions of beings. Human governance, with its emphasis on rights and representation, replaced imperial autocracy. Human culture, with its strange mixture of ambition and idealism, influenced and was influenced by dozens of alien civilizations. The galaxy changed, and humanity changed with it. The bitter, patient hatred that had sustained them through 47 years of occupation evolved into something else, a determination to ensure that no species would ever have to make the choices they had made. They built institutions designed to protect the weak from the strong. They created treaties that guaranteed sovereignty and self-determination. They established monitoring systems to identify and respond to threats before they could metastasize into empire. And they never forgot. Every human child learned the history of the masquerade, the long game, the final war. They learned what their ancestors had endured and what they had become to survive. They learned that freedom was never free, that vigilance was eternal, and that the price of peace was the willingness to fight for it. The Krillians, watching from their position of careful neutrality, eventually issued a new assessment of humanity's place in the galaxy. It was studied by every intelligent species that had access to it, and it became something of a foundational document for interspecies relations. Humans, the assessment concluded, are unique among known species in their capacity for sustained collective action across generational timescales. When threatened, they do not simply respond, they transform, becoming whatever is necessary to overcome the threat. They can be patient beyond comprehension, ruthless beyond imagination, and creative beyond prediction. They make poor slaves, worse enemies, and, as the galaxy is now discovering, surprisingly good partners.
The lesson of the Velthari War is simple. Do not threaten humanity. Do not give them reason to view you as an enemy. Because if you do, they will remember. They wait. And when the time is right, they will remind you why they are the only species to ever reach the stars through a process of continuous self-extinction events that they refer to, with characteristic understatement, as history. They are dangerous beyond measure and valuable beyond price. Treat them accordingly. 100 years after the war, on the anniversary of the Battle of Velcora, a ceremony was held at the memorial built where the imperial palace had once stood. Delegates from 100 species attended, including Velthari, the descendants of the empire that had once ruled a quarter of the galaxy and now served as a cautionary tale. The human speaker was Admiral Chen's great-granddaughter, a woman who had never known war but carried its weight in her genes and education. She spoke of sacrifice and survival, of the cost of freedom and the responsibility that came with power. She spoke of the 11 million who died on Mars, whose names were inscribed on the memorial wall, and of the billions who live today because of their sacrifice. But it was her closing words that were remembered longest.
100 years ago, an empire looked at humanity and saw prey. They saw a species to be conquered, exploited, and controlled. They never imagined that the prey could become the predator, that the slave could become the master, that the broken could become the breakers.
They learned their mistake. They learned it in fire and blood and the collapse of everything they had built. And through their fall, the galaxy learned something as well. It learned that appearances deceive, that patience can be a weapon, that the most dangerous enemy is the one who smiles while sharpening the knife.
We do not share this lesson to threaten or intimidate. We share it because understanding is the foundation of peace. Every species that knows this history knows what humanity is capable of. Every species that knows this history can choose to engage with us honestly, openly, as partners rather than as potential threats.
But let there be no confusion about what happens if that choice is not made. Humanity remembers. Humanity waits. And humanity, as the Velthari discovered, as the galaxy now knows, humanity repays. May this memorial stand forever as a reminder of what happens when civilizations choose domination over cooperation, cruelty over compassion, empire over equality. May the 11 million who died on Mars rest in peace, knowing that their deaths purchased a future in which no species will ever again suffer what they suffered.
And may every being in this galaxy, whatever their species, whatever their origin, whatever their history, remember one simple truth: we are all in this together. The stars are too vast and the darkness too deep for any of us to stand alone. The Velthari tried to rule through fear and fell to fury. Let us build something better, a community of species bound not by conquest, but by common cause, not by submission, but by mutual respect.
That is the future we fight for now, not with weapons, but with wisdom, not through war, but through work. The long game that our ancestors played was necessary, but it's over now. A new game begins, the longest game of all, the game of building a civilization that will endure until the last star burns out and beyond. Humanity is ready to play. Is the galaxy?
The archives of the Foundation, declassified 50 years after the war, revealed the true scale of the masquerade to a galaxy still coming to terms with what humanity had achieved. The documents showed decades of painstaking preparation, of sacrifices made by generations who knew they would never see the results of their work, of a species united in secret purpose while publicly performing subjugation.
Historians pored over the records, trying to understand how it had been possible. How had humanity maintained operational security across 47 years and billions of individuals? How had they prevented the inevitable leaks, betrayals, and accidents that should have exposed the plan decades before it came to fruition? The answer, when it emerged, was both simple and profound. They had made the secret part of their identity. The masquerade wasn't just a plan, it was a culture, a religion, a reason for existence. Every human who participated in it, from the highest admiral to the lowest factory worker, believed that they were part of something greater than themselves. They kept the secret not because they were ordered to, but because the secret was who they were. The Velthari, in their arrogance, had created the very thing they feared most: a humanity united beyond anything their own species could achieve. By threatening humans with extinction, they had given humanity a common enemy. By treating humans as a single, interchangeable mass of inferiors, they had encouraged humans to think of themselves the same way, as a single people with a single purpose. The empire had forged its own doom. This understanding became the foundation of what historians called the Chen Doctrine, named for the admiral who had commanded the final war. The doctrine was simple: never unite a potential enemy. Never give a species a reason to see you as an existential threat. Never create conditions that might forge the kind of patient, implacable resistance that humanity had demonstrated. The doctrine was taught in military academies across the galaxy. It was studied by diplomats and politicians, by strategists and scholars. It became the basis for a new approach to interspecies relations, one based on mutual benefit rather than domination, on cooperation rather than conquest. And it worked. In the centuries following the HFY War, the galaxy experienced an unprecedented era of peace and prosperity. Species that had fought for millennia learned to coexist. Resources that had been hoarded were shared. Technologies that had been jealously guarded were exchanged. The human-led order, for all its flaws, was better than anything that had come before.
But no one forgot the lesson of the war. No one forgot what humanity had done, or what humanity could do if pushed. The peace of the galaxy rested on many foundations: treaties, trade, shared values, mutual dependencies. But beneath them all was a simpler foundation: fear. Not the fear of human aggression, but the fear of what might happen if that aggression was ever provoked again. Humanity had won the war by being underestimated. They had won the peace by ensuring they would never be underestimated again. In the deep archives of Earth, in a vault that had survived the occupation and the war and the centuries that followed, a single document was preserved under maximum security. It was the original founding charter of the Long Game Committee, handwritten by Dr. Sarah Okonkwo on the day humanity chose to play dead rather than die fighting. The document was simple: a single page of intentions and principles, the seed from which an entire civilization had grown. Its final paragraph was displayed in the memorial on Velcora, but the archives held the complete text, including passages that had never been made public. One of those passages read, "We undertake this endeavor knowing that we may not live to see its completion. We accept that our children and grandchildren may inherit a burden they did not choose. We acknowledge that the path we have set will require sacrifices beyond calculation, patience beyond endurance, and faith beyond reason. But we believe it is the only path that offers true survival. Not the survival of individuals, but the survival of what humanity can become. The HFY have shown us that the universe is hostile, that power determines fate, that mercy is weakness in the eyes of those who have none. Very well, we will learn that lesson. We will internalize it. We will become what we must become. And then, when we have become it, we will prove that lesson wrong. We will show the galaxy that mercy can coexist with strength, that cooperation can triumph over conquest, that a species can be dangerous enough to survive and wise enough to deserve survival. That is the true goal of this endeavor, not revenge, though revenge we shall have, but redemption. Redemption for ourselves, for our oppressors, for a galaxy that has known nothing but the law of the strong. We will be strong, stronger than any who came before us. And with that strength, we will build something better. This is the long game. This is the human way. This is who we choose to become. Let us begin. 500 years after the fall of the HFY Empire, a Krillian philosopher published an essay that became the definitive analysis of humanity's impact on galactic civilization. The essay was titled The Trap and the Promise, and it argued that humanity's rise represented both the greatest danger and the greatest hope the galaxy had ever known. The trap, the philosopher wrote, was not for the HFY alone.
It was for the entire galaxy. When humanity demonstrated what they could do, the patience, the planning, the execution, they showed every species what was possible. They showed that any species, no matter how primitive it appeared, could be hiding a knife behind its smile. They showed that apparent submission could mask absolute determination. They showed that the gap between helpless and unstoppable could be closed in a single generation by a species willing to pay the price. This knowledge has changed the galaxy fundamentally. No power can ever again assume safety based on apparent superiority. No empire can rest easy, knowing that somewhere, some species might be playing the same game humanity played. The Velthari created a template for resistance that will exist as long as intelligent life persists. That template is the trap, a trap that holds every would-be conqueror, every aspiring empire, every species that might otherwise choose domination over cooperation. But there is also a promise, the promise of what comes after the trap is sprung. Humanity could have become what they fought against. They had every justification for cruelty, every reason for revenge, every opportunity for empire. They chose differently. They chose to build rather than destroy, to heal rather than harm, to create a galaxy where the trap they built would never need to be used again. This is the promise, that strength and wisdom can coexist, that a species capable of destroying civilizations can also be capable of building them, that the same qualities that make humanity dangerous, their patience, their unity, their determination, can be directed toward creation as effectively as destruction. The galaxy owes humanity a debt it can never repay. They showed us the trap, and then they showed us the way out of it. They demonstrated that fear is not the only foundation for peace, that mutual benefit can be more powerful than mutual destruction. They became strong enough to rule, and then they chose to lead instead. This is the human way. This is what they taught the galaxy. And this is why, 500 years after they emerged from their long disguise, they remain the most important species in known space. Not because they are the strongest, though they are, not because they are the smartest, though they may be, but because they proved that strength and wisdom need not to be opposed. They showed us that we could be better, and then they helped us become it. In the end, the story of humanity and the Velthari Empire was not a story of war, though war was part of it. It was not a story of revenge, though revenge was achieved. It was not even a story of triumph, though triumph there certainly was. It was a story of transformation, a species that faced extinction and chose to become something new, an empire that never imagined its victims could become its conquerors, a galaxy that learned, through fire and blood and the patient accumulation of decades, that the universe was not what it had assumed. The Velthari had warned other species about humanity in those last desperate days before their fall. They had sent messages to every power in the galaxy, begging them to unite against the human threat before it was too late. But the warnings came too late, and the other species had their own reasons for letting the empire fall. What the Velthari never understood, what they could never understand, was that their warnings were part of the trap too. Every message they sent, every desperate plea, every panicked revelation of human capabilities, all of it served to spread the fear that humanity needed the galaxy to feel. Not fear of human aggression, but fear of human potential. The understanding that humanity, once roused, was capable of anything. That fear kept the peace. It kept the galaxy from forming coalitions against humanity during the long years of integration. It kept opportunistic powers from testing human resolve. It kept the new order stable long enough to become self-sustaining, to evolve from a human hegemony into a true community of species. And eventually, that fear faded. It faded because humanity gave it no fuel. They did not conquer. They did not oppress. They did not repeat the mistakes of the Velthari or any empire before them. They built and they shared, and they proved through centuries of consistent behavior that their strength was not a threat to species that chose to be their friends. The fear was replaced by something else, something that had been there from the beginning, hidden beneath the hatred and the patience and the terrible preparation. Hope. The hope that the galaxy could be better than it had been. The hope that strength could serve wisdom instead of opposing it. The hope that the long game, once won, could become the foundation for a future worth having. Humanity had spent 47 years pretending to be broken. They had emerged from that disguise as the most formidable power in the galaxy. But their true transformation, the one that mattered most, was still ahead of them. The transformation from warriors to builders, from avengers to healers, from the species that won the war to the species that won the peace. That transformation took longer than the war. It was harder than the war. It required sacrifices as great as any made during the masquerade. But it was accomplished, in time. And when it was done, humanity had become something none of them had ever expected to become. They had become hope. 1,000 years after first contact. 1,000 years since the Velthari arrived in Sol System and demanded submission. 1,000 years since Dr. Sarah Okonkwo wrote her charter and humanity began its long game. The galaxy had changed beyond recognition. Species that had been mortal enemies shared worlds and cultures. Technologies that had seemed like magic were commonplace. The dark spaces between stars, once haunted by fear and isolation, were bright with the traffic of 100 civilizations. And at the center of it all, no longer dominant but still essential, humanity continued its journey. They had evolved, as all species evolve. They had changed, as all cultures change. But they had not forgotten. They would never forget. On Earth, in a garden that had once been the site of the Foundation's most secret bunker, a simple monument marked the beginning of everything. It bore no names, no dates, no grand inscriptions, just a single line, carved in stone, that would last until the sun grew cold. We remembered. We waited. We prevailed. And then we built. Beneath those words, visitors from across the galaxy came to pay their respects. They came to remember what humanity had endured, to honor what humanity had achieved, and to recommit themselves to the vision humanity had offered. A galaxy united not by fear but by common purpose, not by power but by principle. And somewhere, in the quantum depths of the memorial systems, a recording waited. It was the last message Dr. Okonkwo had made before her death, preserved for a time when it might be needed. A time when humanity might lose its way, might forget why the long game had been played, might be tempted to become the thing it had fought against. The message had never been played. 1,000 years, and it had never been needed. But it remained there, waiting, a final safeguard against a future that had never come. Remember who we were, the message said. Remember what we became. Remember the price we paid and the future we purchased with that price. And if you ever find yourselves forgetting, if you ever find yourselves becoming the empire instead of its destroyers, play this message again. Remember the 11 million. Remember the 47 years. Remember what it meant to be human in the darkness, and let that memory guide you back to the light. We did not survive to become monsters. We survived to become better. Never forget that. Never let anyone forget it. Because the moment we forget, the moment we become what we fought, everything we sacrificed was for nothing.
Be strong, be wise, be kind when you can, and ruthless when you must. But above all, be worthy of the sacrifice. Be worthy of the long game. Be worthy of all those who lived and died so that you could exist in a galaxy free from the fear that defined our lives.
This is your inheritance. Guard it well. The message ended. The galaxy continued. And humanity, having proved that the trapped could become the trappers, that the weak could become the strong, that the broken could become the breakers, turned its face toward the future and whatever challenges it might bring. They had played the longest game in history. They had won. And now, with the weight of 1,000 years behind them and the light of infinite possibilities ahead, they prepared to play again. Because that was what humanity did. That was who they were. Patient beyond measure, determined beyond reason, capable of anything when the stakes were high enough. The galaxy had learned that lesson. The galaxy would remember. And as long as the stars burned and intelligent life persisted, the story of the long game would be told. A warning, a promise, and a testament to the strange, stubborn, impossible species that had looked at an empire of 1,000 subjugated races and said, "We will not be one of them."
And they weren't.
They never were. They never would be.